went to law school here in Washington, really thinking that I wanted to help people. And I got involved in a lot of different organizations after I graduated, and even while I was in law school. It was really designed to sort of help people get information to help them empower themselves in various ways. Whether that was fighting special interests for tax reform, working to get more universal access to health insurance, cleaning up toxic chemicals in communities, or ultimately getting a national health plan passed under the ACA. And in 2000, the election that was very close, and it brought home to a lot of people that there was a lot wrong with our election voting systems and our elections, and brought greater scrutiny to what we needed to do about that. So in 2004, I spent a lot of time talking to election lawyers around the country who tended to be the people that were called on election day or by candidates to work on the election day itself. And just learned that there was a lot of things that could have been done differently, but they were all things that had to be done during the year, not on election day. Finally, in 2004, I was one of the two lawyers that was at the hotline, the 1-800 hotline, where people would call in about problems on the ground, to make a call whether or not we should send lawyers to the problem or the media or both. And what occurred to me at the end of that evening of the election was that almost no problem that we found could have been solved on election day. They were the result of either election officials making poor decisions leading up to the election, not having enough ballots, not having enough privacy booths, changing the precinct at the last minute in terms of location, or organizations that didn't know what the rules were. So they weren't able to, they would, for example, register people but not put the right information down. This was true particularly with some of the student groups that I had talked to, who had put student P.O. boxes down in the registration forms instead of the street address of the dorm they lived in. And many of those ballots just get thrown out. So all of that combined, I thought, we needed to do something more year-round to address these problems with elections. And I went back to all these lawyers. There were about 75 of them that I talked to over the course of the year, and said, would you be part of an effort year-round to do something about addressing voting reform? And they said, well, yes, it was part of some strategy, that it wasn't just call me on election day. And I said, would you do it pro bono? And most of them said yes. So then moving forward, I wanted to figure out what was going on in terms of information for the organizations that were increasingly getting involved in mobilizing their members during the election. And so I got a little bit of money from a funder to pull together a study. I hired 3 law students and 3 people that worked in the 2000 campaign, young campaign workers. And we spent the summer of 2005 looking at 7 swing states. And we talked to the C3 organizations, the 3 C4 organizations, the unions, the groups that were doing neighborhood organization work, et cetera, and asked them all, how do you get your information? Do you get information? Do you have access to lawyers that can tell you whether what you're trying to do is going to meet the requirements of the law in terms of the registration or getting people out to vote? And we looked at that and realized that an awful lot of organizations, and increasingly organizations, were starting to tell their members, let's get involved in elections. It's important in terms of advancing our agenda. Too many of them didn't have access to good routine information. So in 2006, the beginning of the year, after I pulled together about 50 organizations and lawyers here in Washington, and we had a meeting and we talked through what would you think of the value of having an organization that could knit together the expertise of these lawyers around the country, and they could share information from one state to another. An organization that could generate plain language voting guides, and an organization that could go out and do some training for organizations that increasingly were moving into the mobilizing voters in the work that they were doing, and whether it was a senior organization or a union or a community organization, et cetera. And that's when we launched the Fair Elections Legal Network. The name was the Legal Network. It's a little awkward, but it was because we had all these lawyers. It was a sponsored project, and it stayed a sponsored project until 2017, when we spun it off as a standalone 501c3 and changed the name to Fair Elections Center. We've been involved in a lot of cutting-edge issues that really, from first impression. So, for example, we were involved in beginning to talk to student organizations about how they get their information on campus. And after a couple of years of helping students, training their leadership, we realized that, these students were on institutions of higher education campuses, and it should be the role of those campuses to educate their students. It's really, in many cases, the mission of a college and university is to prepare the next generation of citizens. So certainly, and I remember, having a lot of conversations about, okay, well, let's create some kind of student effort. And we kept on trying to figure out what's a good name for it. Should it be student vote, student power, so on. And we eventually came up with the Campus Vote Project. And that was one of the important things. And then in 2016, after years of urging organizations to get their members to sign up to be poll workers because their members would be better served with people from their own community being inside the polls, nobody would do it because it was too complicated. You'd go to the county website and there'd be a lot of gobbledygook and no one knew what they were signing up for. So we got a small grant in 2016, and we put together a prototype project, which our current litigation director, John Sherman, was sort of responsible for figuring out. And it became the basis for Work Elections, which is now the basis for also Power the Polls, which became the largest effort to recruit poll workers during the height of the pandemic, and was responsible for 700,000 people signing up to be poll workers. That program is all based on our Work Elections database and our API.